What you are about to hear might sound like something out of a political thriller, but this is not fiction. This is happening right now in the United States of America, and the implications are so massive that they could reshape the entire political landscape of the most powerful nation on Earth. We are witnessing a constitutional showdown that historians will be writing about for the next century, and most people have absolutely no idea how close we are to the edge of something unprecedented. Let me take you through exactly what is unfolding, why it matters more than almost anything else happening in the world right now, and what this could mean for not just America, but for the entire global order. Because when the foundations of American democracy start shaking, the tremors are felt in every capital, every stock exchange, and every military command center around the planet. Stay with me through this entire breakdown because the details I am about to share will completely change how you understand the current political moment. The story begins with a fundamental question that America has never truly had to answer in its modern history. What happens when the most powerful office in the world collides with the judicial system in a way that neither side is willing to back down from? We have seen presidents face legal challenges before. We have seen courts issue rulings that angered those in power. But what we are witnessing right now is something different. This is a complete breakdown in the traditional norms that have held American governance together for nearly 250 years. When reports first emerged about the Civil War rhetoric coming from Trump's inner circle and his own statements, many dismissed it as typical political hyperbole. They said he was just playing to his base, using inflammatory language to fire up supporters and generate media attention. But here is what those critics missed, and this is crucial to understanding the gravity of the situation. The language being used now is not random. It is not just emotional venting. It is strategic, it is calculated, and it has a specific purpose that becomes terrifyingly clear when you understand the broader context. Let me explain what I mean by breaking down the sequence of events that led us to this moment. The judicial actions that have been taken against Trump represent something unprecedented in American history. Never before has a former president faced this level of legal jeopardy from multiple directions simultaneously. We are talking about federal cases, state cases, civil cases, and potential criminal liability that spans years of conduct. And through all of this, the rhetoric has been escalating in ways that legal experts and political scientists are watching with genuine alarm. The Civil War language is not metaphorical anymore. When Trump and his most ardent supporters talk about what happens if he is removed from political life through legal means, they are explicitly invoking the specter of armed conflict. They are suggesting that tens of millions of Americans would not accept such an outcome peacefully. And here is the part that should send chills down your spine. They are not wrong about the numbers. Polling data consistently shows that a significant portion of the American electorate believes the entire legal system has been weaponized against their preferred candidate. Whether you agree with that assessment or not is beside the point. What matters is that millions of people believe it, and that belief creates the conditions for exactly the kind of instability that the founders of America tried to prevent. Now, let us talk about the judge and the impeachment referral, because this is where the situation gets even more complex and even more dangerous. When a federal judge takes the extraordinary step of making a referral related to impeachment proceedings, it signals that the judicial branch believes there is evidence of conduct so serious that it rises to the level of constitutional crisis. This is not something that happens casually. This is not a political stunt or a partisan maneuver. This is the machinery of American governance recognizing that something has gone fundamentally wrong. The National Guard element of this story is perhaps the most concerning piece of all. When discussions begin about the potential deployment of military or quasi-military forces in response to political conflict, we have crossed into territory that most Americans thought was impossible. The National Guard exists to protect American communities from natural disasters, to assist in emergencies, and in extreme cases, to maintain order when civilian law enforcement cannot. But the conversation happening right now is about the National Guard being invoked not for any of those purposes, but as part of a political conflict between branches of government. This is the kind of thing that happens in countries Americans used to watch on the news and shake their heads at. Now it is happening here. Let me give you some historical context that will help you understand just how unprecedented this is. In the entire history of the United States, there have been only a handful of moments where the country came close to genuine internal armed conflict after the Civil War ended in 1865. The closest we came was probably during the Civil Rights era, when federal forces had to be deployed to enforce desegregation orders against the will of state governments. But even then, there was a fundamental agreement among most Americans about the legitimacy of the federal government itself. What we are seeing now is different. A substantial portion of the population no longer accepts the basic premise that federal courts have the authority to take the actions they are taking. This brings us to the question of what happens next, and I need you to understand something important here. The outcome of this crisis will not be determined by legal arguments or constitutional interpretations. It will be determined by power, by organization, and by the willingness of various actors to push beyond the boundaries that have traditionally constrained American political conflict. The courts can issue rulings, but those rulings only matter if someone enforces them. Congress can vote on impeachment, but that only matters if the political will exists to follow through. And the president, whether current or former, can make statements about civil war, and those only matter if people are willing to act on them. What we are watching is a test of American institutions, unlike anything we have seen in living memory. And here is what makes this moment so critical for everyone watching around the world. America's role as the guarantor of global stability depends entirely on the perception that its own house is in order. When international partners look at what is happening right now, they see a country that may not be able to fulfill its commitments. They see a nation that could be consumed by internal conflict at exactly the moment when global challenges require American leadership. China is watching. Russia is watching. Every adversary and every ally is calculating what this means for their own interests. The economic implications alone should be enough to make everyone pay attention. The United States dollar serves as the world's reserve currency precisely because of the perceived stability of American governance. When that stability is called into question, when there are serious discussions about civil war and military deployment in response to political disputes, the foundations of the entire global financial system begin to shake. We are talking about potential market disruptions that would make 2008 look like a minor correction. We are talking about trillions of dollars in value that could evaporate overnight if the situation escalates beyond a certain point. But let me bring this back to the immediate situation, because the details of what is happening right now are crucial. The judge's referral related to impeachment represents a crossing of the Rubicon that many thought would never happen. It signals that there is evidence of conduct so serious, so potentially criminal, that the normal processes of the justice system are not sufficient. Impeachment is a political remedy, designed for situations where the legal system cannot adequately address the threat posed by someone in or seeking power. When a judge makes this kind of referral, it is essentially saying that this is not just a legal matter, but a constitutional emergency. The response to this referral has been exactly what many feared. Instead of engaging with the process, instead of mounting a legal defense and allowing the system to work, the response has been to delegitimize the entire system. The rhetoric about civil war is designed to create a choice for the American people: either accept our preferred outcome or face the possibility of violent conflict. This is not how democracy is supposed to work. This is not how the rule of law is supposed to function. This is, to be blunt about it, a form of political hostage-taking that threatens the very foundation of Republican government. Now I want to talk about the National Guard specifically, because understanding this piece is essential to grasping the full picture. The National Guard occupies a unique position in the American military structure. It serves both state and federal purposes, and its chain of command can shift depending on the circumstances. Governors control their state National Guard units under normal conditions, but the president can federalize those units, taking them out of state control and placing them under direct federal command. This dual structure was designed to balance state and federal power, but it also creates the potential for conflict when those two levels of government are at odds. The discussions happening now about the National Guard are occurring in exactly this context of state-federal tension. Some governors have indicated their willingness to support Trump regardless of what federal courts or Congress decide. Others have made clear they will follow federal authority. This division is not just political theater. It represents a genuine fracturing of the chain of command that could have devastating consequences if the situation escalates. Imagine a scenario where the National Guard in one state is ordered to do one thing by the governor, while the federal government is ordering the opposite. This is not hypothetical. This is the direction current events are pointing. The historical parallels to this moment are deeply troubling. Before the American Civil War, there was a period of escalating rhetoric and institutional breakdown that looks eerily similar to what we are witnessing now. The Southern states did not simply wake up one morning and decide to secede. There was a long process of delegitimizing federal authority, of building parallel power structures, of convincing ordinary people that the federal government was an illegitimate tyranny that had to be resisted. The same patterns are visible today, and anyone who tells you it cannot happen again is not paying attention to history. But here is what makes the current situation potentially even more dangerous than the 1850s. The weapons available to potential combatants are infinitely more deadly. The communications technology allows for coordination and mobilization at speeds that would have been unimaginable to previous generations. And the political polarization is not geographic in the way it was before the Civil War. It is distributed throughout every state, every city, every community. A modern American civil conflict would not look like armies facing each other across fields. It would look like something far more chaotic and far more destructive. I want to be clear about something important here. I am not saying that civil war is inevitable or even likely. What I am saying is that the rhetoric being used right now, the actions being taken by various political actors, and the institutional breakdown we are witnessing are creating conditions where such an outcome becomes thinkable in a way it has not been for generations. The purpose of this analysis is not to frighten you, but to make sure you understand the stakes of this moment and why it matters more than almost anything else happening in the world. Let me talk about the international dimension of this crisis, because that is often overlooked in domestic coverage. The United States has treaty obligations to dozens of countries. It provides security guarantees that undergird the entire post-World War II international order. NATO, the alliance of Pacific democracies, the financial institutions that manage global trade, all of these rest on the assumption that America is a stable, predictable actor that will honor its commitments. When that assumption is called into question, the ripple effects are enormous. Consider what is happening in Europe right now with the ongoing tensions with Russia. European security depends fundamentally on the belief that America would come to the defense of NATO allies if they were attacked. But if America is consumed by internal political conflict, if there is genuine uncertainty about who controls the American military and what orders they would follow, that security guarantee becomes worthless. Putin understands this. He is watching what is happening in America with great interest, and he is almost certainly calculating how to exploit the chaos. The same dynamic applies in Asia, where China is watching American weakness with keen attention. Taiwan's security, Japan's security, the entire architecture of Asian stability depends on American power projection capability and American political will. If America is turned inward, fighting over its own political future, the temptation for China to move on Taiwan or to assert dominance in the South China Sea becomes much greater. The stakes of American political stability are not just American, they are global. Now let me return to the specifics of the current moment, because there are details that deserve close attention. The legal maneuvers happening around Trump's cases are unprecedented in their complexity and their implications. We have multiple jurisdictions, multiple charges, and multiple judges all operating simultaneously. The coordination challenges alone are immense. But what makes this truly unusual is the political pressure being brought to bear on every aspect of the legal process. Judges are receiving threats, prosecutors are being demonized, witnesses are being intimidated. This is not normal legal process. This is the systematic destruction of the rule of law by actors who have concluded that the law itself is their enemy. And here is the critical point. When enough powerful people decide that the law does not apply to them, the law ceases to have any force. It becomes merely words on paper, enforced selectively if at all. The impeachment referral in this context takes on enormous significance. Impeachment was designed by the founders precisely for situations like this, situations where the normal legal process might be insufficient to address a threat to the republic. The founders understood that there could be individuals who accumulated so much power, who had such devoted followings, that ordinary legal mechanisms would be unable to constrain them. Impeachment was the safety valve, the ultimate check on executive power. But impeachment only works if there is political will to use it. And this is where we get to the heart of the current crisis. The political polarization in America has reached a point where many elected officials are more afraid of their own voters than they are of any constitutional principle. They will not vote to impeach or convict someone from their own party, regardless of the evidence, because doing so would mean the end of their political careers. This is a fundamental breakdown in the system of checks and balances that the founders designed. The Civil War rhetoric is both a symptom of this breakdown and a cause of it. When political leaders tell their followers that the other side is not just wrong, but illegitimate, not just mistaken, but evil, they create the conditions where compromise becomes impossible and conflict becomes inevitable. We have crossed that threshold. The question now is whether we can step back from the brink before it is too late. I want to spend some time talking about what ordinary citizens can do in this moment, because I believe that understanding alone is not enough. Action is required. But the kind of action matters enormously. Violence is not the answer. Escalation is not the answer. What is needed is a recommitment to the democratic process, a willingness to accept outcomes that we do not like because we recognize that the alternative is worse. This is harder than it sounds. When you genuinely believe that the other side is destroying everything you hold dear, accepting their victory feels like surrender. But here is the uncomfortable truth. Both sides feel that way. Both sides believe they are fighting for the soul of the nation against enemies who would destroy it. And both sides cannot be right about that. The reality is more complex, more nuanced, and less dramatic than the rhetoric on either side would suggest. The path forward requires something that is in short supply right now: political courage. It requires elected officials who are willing to put their careers at risk in defense of constitutional principles. It requires citizens who are willing to challenge their own side when it goes too far. It requires media figures who are willing to prioritize truth over engagement. None of this is likely to happen in sufficient quantity, but it is what is needed. Let me bring this back to the immediate question of what happens in the coming weeks and months. The legal cases against Trump will continue to move forward, slowly and steadily. There will be more hearings, more rulings, more appeals. Each one will be an opportunity for escalation, a potential flashpoint where rhetoric could become action. The Civil War language will continue, growing more explicit and more dangerous as the legal noose tightens. The National Guard will likely remain in the background, a threat implied rather than deployed. But even the threat changes the calculus. When political actors believe that military force is available to them, they behave differently. They take risks they would not otherwise take. They make statements they would not otherwise make. The presence of the military option, even if unused, distorts the entire political process. And through all of this, America's position in the world will continue to erode. Allies will become less trusting. Adversaries will become more bold. The international order that America built and sustained for 3/4 of a century will continue to fray. This is the real cost of the current crisis, and it will be paid for generations to come. I want to end with something that I hope will stay with you after this video ends. The American experiment is not guaranteed to succeed. There is nothing written in the stars that says, this country must endure. Every generation faces choices that determine whether the experiment continues or fails. Our generation is facing one of those choices right now. The founders knew this. They knew that what they were creating was fragile, dependent on the wisdom and virtue of those who would come after them. Benjamin Franklin, when asked what kind of government the Constitutional Convention had created, famously replied, "A republic, if you can keep it." That conditional has never felt more relevant than it does today. The question before us is whether we will keep it, whether we will choose democratic processes over political violence, whether we will accept institutional constraints even when they prevent us from getting what we want, whether we will recognize that our political opponents are fellow citizens with legitimate interests, not enemies to be destroyed. These choices will be made in the coming months and years, and they will determine the future, not just of America, but of the entire world. What you have just heard is not meant to make you feel hopeless. It is meant to make you feel the urgency of this moment and to understand that what happens next depends on choices that ordinary citizens make every day. The crisis is real, the danger is genuine. But so is the possibility of choosing a different path. If you found this analysis valuable, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell because the situation is developing rapidly and I will be covering every major development as it happens. Share this video with anyone who needs to understand what is really going on because the mainstream coverage is not giving you the full picture. And leave a comment below telling me what you think happens next because your perspective matters and I read every comment. The next few months will be among the most consequential in American history. We will face choices that will determine whether the republic survives or falls. Understanding what is at stake is the first step toward making the right choices. And now you understand. What you do with that understanding is up to you.